Where are all those learning loss people that were running their mouths after COVID now? Where are you at? Where are you at? Like, seriously. Okay, you were concerned about learning loss while teachers were busting their rear end and admin and superintendents were doing things that no one was prepared for, but yet you want to distill and dismiss all those efforts down to, well, we had learning loss. Where are they at now? Because now, just like you said, and I'm not blaming education at all, they're doing what's called educational triage. We need people in classrooms. We need them. And it has distilled down to we just need bodies rather than we want the best and the brightest. So where again, I'll keep saying, learning loss people, where you at?
Welcome, everybody, back to another exciting edition of the UnDisrupted podcast. Adam, today's debate, the book versus the movie. Where do you land on this?
Ooh, it all depends on both, really, because I read some books that were so amazing. One, Ready Player One. The book was so amazing. But as I was reading that book, I was like, there's no way they're going to get all these things cleared to be in the actual movie when they made it. And so I like how they kind of, morphed it and modified it. But it's so weird because it could have been so much more if they got all those properties cleared to do that. So that was one of those where technology kind of got involved and got in the way of things. But you know what? I hate to sound like an educator, but for me, definitely the book. Now, if you talk about comics now, because I'm a comics fan, I do love the MCU a whole lot better than the comic books because as a kid, I always thought about those things coming to life. And I like how they're telling a different story of some of these comic book characters. So that's just me. What say you, Hooker?
I live in Mordor, so therefore, I'm thinking about the Lord of the Rings, all the time, right? And that was an interesting book, but I thought that adaptation was absolutely outstanding. Peter Jackson did a lot to lift it from the page to the screen, but they left out a lot as well. And I think about when I was teaching first grade way back in the day, Harry Potter had just come out, and so I would read this book every day to my students, some of which, believe it or not, their parents would not allow them to listen to me read it to them, because of it contained what they had witchcraft. And so I had to send certain kids out of the room. Anyway, so at the end of the year, by the way, those kids that got sent out of the room, the two that did, I remember them, they were always so interested because they knew it was kind of a forbidden fruit for them. Anyway, at the end of the year, I said, guys, we're going to go watch the movie. It just came out. I can't legally take you because the district won't let me, but at 4:00 at this time, meet me at this theater. I'll buy all your tickets. We'll figure it out. Of course, all the parents dropped off all their kids and they didn't realize that they were supposed to stay with their kids, but that's okay. So that said, we got back and it was the most intense debate we'd ever had with a bunch of 6-year-olds about the parts that they had left out of the movie. And they were disappointed in some of the things, even though that was a great movie adaptation. So yeah, with me, I'm going to go back to the book. Although I will say one example of the opposite direction would be The Godfather. Mario Puzo's Godfather is a great book. The movie is outstanding when you think about the actors that are in that. So without further ado, we need to welcome in our guest on this. Our guest may have a lot to say. He's been nodding his head a lot in the background there. He's Ken Shelton. He's the jack of all trades, the master of some. He's an international keynote speaker. He works with organizations like ISTE to make ed tech better for all students. And a winner, the award winner of the Making It Happen Award just recently too. Ken, first of all, welcome to the podcast. And what say you on this important debate?
All right. First of all, it's good to see the both of you. I got to see you in person not too long ago, and now I get to see you here. So I appreciate both of you very much in this opportunity. So book versus movie. I have to agree with both of you in the sense that more often than not, the book tends to be better than a movie because you can fit more content in 200 pages. For your audience and for you all, the thing to recognize, the general rule of thumb is 1 page of script equals 60 seconds of film. So if you got a book that's 200 pages, that's 200 minutes. So that's part of the reason why, exactly. So that's part of the reason why, and that's not even counting your establishing shot, your transition shots, and all those things that are going to eat up time. So it's almost impossible to really take everything that we see in a book and then adapt it to a screenplay and make a film. But I will say, first of all, I fully agree with The Godfather, but there's also a reason why they had to make so many of them because of the depth to the story. As you all were saying this, I was thinking, like Adam, I'm a huge MCU fan. And there are a lot of things that I remember reading in my comic books, which, by the way, for the audience, don't discourage your kids from reading comic books. They're still reading. Okay, it's just like graphic novels. But my thing about that was that there's so much complexity to many of the characters that even in the context of the MCU, especially the most recent Phase 3, they didn't do a whole lot of the historical character development because you have to adapt as much as you can, but still fit it within roughly about 120 minutes. For me, I'm thinking in terms of the one that stands out to me the most is still the film Spike Lee did of Malcolm X, in regards to how well he took the. Now there are a lot of things in the book that aren't in the movie, but he pulled out the most critical things that show the growth, the depth, and the evolution of Malcolm X from being Malcolm Little, born in Omaha, Nebraska, to what ended up being the social justice warrior that we all know that was assassinated in 1963, if I remember correctly. I don't remember the year, but at any rate, so that's one. But for me, the whole thing is, when it comes to story, does a movie serve as a catalyst for you to read the book? Or does you reading the book serve as a catalyst for you to go see how they took words off paper and turned it into visual imagery? That's why I don't really worry about a debate between which is better or not. I always say, why not consume both? And then you can formulate your own perspective and opinions about those things. So
You set me up perfect for the next question I want to ask you then. So we're talking about books and movies and everything. So what's your backstory, to get to you where you are today? Because of course you didn't end up being the person you are right here, right now. So we're making this movie of Ken Shelton. What's the backstory to get you to this point right here? Because I know we've done some modeling. I know you spent some time. You spent some time as a rescuer or something. I think I saw an ad where you were coming out of a helicopter saving people or something.
yeah, yeah. No, it's yeah. I appreciate you asking that. My evolution and growth to where I am at this point, I'll share it in several phases, since I'll use an MCU reference here. So the first phase is the fact that I share this in many of my talks. I do come from a family of educators and the educated. I stress this in many of the workshops that I do, that I'm 52 years old and I'm actually fourth generation in my family to go to college. And so I always tell people, like, let that sink in for a moment. And in fact, my paternal grandmother had 9 siblings. She was born in 1919, and her father owned land in Alabama and put all 10 of his children through college. So for me, it was never. There was never any messaging in my upbringing of, you got to get an education. It was an expectation, and it was, this is just what you do. There's no alternative to it. And so I did. I did reasonably well in school. I would say, because of my father, may he rest in power. My father knew how to play the game of school. My father worked in education. He was a chief business officer for several county offices of education here in California. And so he really, among the many times, variations, and versions of the talk, one that occurred over the course of my entire middle school and probably most of my high school years, was how to navigate the game of school. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do well in high school because I knew how to play the game. And I was raised in a household by, especially my father and both of my grandmothers, to really be a staunch self-advocate, and be unapologetic in that capacity. But I also was, that's the academic side, but the athletic side, I also was fortunate enough to play multiple sports in high school and play football in college. So between that and not making it playing professional football, which we before, so for the audience, before we got on, we were talking about math. I always share with people, let's do some real world math about things like the NFL. There are 32 teams, a roster is 53 players. So what's 53 times 32? That's how many available jobs there are in the NFL annually, but it's really not that number, because you have players that, they're going to have, a 5, 10, 15-year career, which is very rare. In fact, I believe the average NFL career. So when I got out of college at UCLA, the average NFL career back then, I think, was 2.5 to 3 years. I think it's actually lower now. So I didn't make it, which is fine. And then in between that and then starting or kickstarting a career in education. I did acting and modeling for quite some time, as you all referenced before, and then I got into education. I subbed for a while in LA Unified, and then I just realized that I really want to do more. And my dad was like, "Then you need to go get your credential and your master's, and then we'll talk about the doctorate at some point." And so that's what I did, and I really enjoy education. There are a lot of things that I see that need examination, interrogation, but as we all know, that there's things that it brings us joy. That unfortunately we're starting to see a lot of those things stripped of education educators now. That I really I always say every time an educator leaves a profession because they feel that they have no choice but to do something else, we all lose out. Society loses out.
So let's touch on that for just a second, because there is Adam and I have been talking about this the last season really and a half, but now I feel like it's starting to grow more and more. The pandemic of teacher burnout, or the quiet quit, or whatever we want to call it. And some people think, well, we'll throw some extra money at it, right? Which, I mean, money, yes, we've been historically underpaid for decades, and that would definitely help. But what else? I mean, why the burnout? And the reason I think it's important is because I think what's going to happen is this year, those that did stay and did stick it out are now going to feel the pressure and the weight of having to take on extra classes, extra size, because there's not enough people to deploy. And like here in Austin, we had 1,000 short as of 3 months ago. Now we're 250 short as of a week of school going. And they're just pulling bodies off the street. I mean, I think they were like, okay, you're alive. Yes, you can come teach. So I think it's going to continue to expand. How do we stop this? How do we slow it down? How do we bring it all back? Big question.
Well,
easy answer, right?
Yeah, but I mean, well, first of all, here's my thing. Where are all those learning loss people that were running their mouths after COVID now? Where are you at? Where are you at? Like, seriously. Okay, you were concerned about learning loss while teachers were busting their rear end and admin and superintendents were doing things that no one was prepared for, but yet you want to distill and dismiss all those efforts down to, well, we had learning loss. Where are they at now? Because now, just like you said, and I'm not blaming education at all, they're doing what's called educational triage. We need people in classrooms. We need them. And it has distilled down to we just need bodies rather than we want the best and the brightest. So where again, I'll keep saying, learning loss people, where you at? Now, yeah, exactly. Let's hear it. And you know what? I mean, added to that, all those learning loss people, I don't see them going and applying for these jobs. Hey, if you're so concerned about learning loss and you've got teachers that are leaving and there's a gap in staffing, which means there's going to be a gap in opportunity and access for learning, I don't see you stepping up and filling that gap. Where you at? Now, to answer your question, I don't think it's as simplistic as more money. I think it is the totality of overall job experience satisfaction. And I would define that as economic compensation, social well-being, inspiration and motivation for growth, as well as recognition of contributions. All of the above. Um, there are things that I know people will do that they are willing to make certain concessions in many of the areas because they are being compensated to a large extent, or to a degree that they say, okay, well, you know what? I don't really like this, but I am being paid for it. It's something I share with folks that do consulting gigs where they're like, I don't really want to do this. And I'm like, then you should submit a proposal for an amount of money that says, you know what, I really want to do this, but the money makes it now palatable for me to go ahead and do it. But that's what I'm saying. It's in varying degrees across those areas because, look, at some point, you could go through 10, 15, 20 years and say, I'm making a lot of money, but I'm not fulfilled. I mean, look, I know of folks that have left education and they are like, I would rather go, and this is no disrespect to the people that pull shots in coffee shops, the baristas, but they will say, well, I'll just go pull shots. And I'm like, well, you might take a pay cut. They're like, you know what? It's customer service. I get to interact with people. I don't have to deal with, and then they go through the litany of things that they have to deal with. And and I bring that up because that's one of the things that I had heard a lot is the fact that in some cases they were willing to take it, in this case, a minor pay cut for that job satisfaction. So that's what I'm saying. It isn't just throw more money at the problem. And by the way, here's one. Oh, you're going to throw more money at the problem. What you going to do when we're in a recession? Where's that money going to go? It's not sustainable. And that's where Adam was a part of. He and I were together on the whole group for the at ISTE, the leadership exchange, and the whole theme of the leadership exchange was sustainability. Throwing money at a problem is not sustainable because that money isn't going to always be there.
That it's interesting, the economics of that. There was actually, I was on a panel at a conference. I won't name the conference, but there was a panel I was on where a gentleman told me that we're over exaggerating the teacher shortage with the financial part of it. And he said, actually, because the economy is tanking now, he goes, this is going to be good for education. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, because all those people going out and getting all this extra work aren't going to have it now. They're going to have to just fall back. And I was like, so you're saying we're now the de facto fall
Exactly.
back. I need to make money.
The
So I'm just going to get
consolation prize.
We are. And I just said, that's not any better.
I know, which is crazy when you look at the areas that people try to revere. We always hear people like, "Oh, salute our troops" and all this stuff. And all my sisters served in the military. My father served in the military. But sometimes in high school, we look at it, well, if you need to get your life together, join the military. It's the fallback where the kid wasn't good in school. So you say, well, maybe so you don't work at the factory, get a job, go into the military. Or if you have your biology degree or ELA and you can't figure it out, it's like, oh, well, your fallback is teaching. So we take these areas where we say we revere and we make it the fallback, which really cheapens the effort and things that they do. But if I can change gears just a little bit, in education, there's always the need to support, to help, and we try to do the best work we can with the boys and girls that we're entrusted. But there's been some pushback in places when you start talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I know you've done some work in this space. So let me ask you, how do you navigate this particular space and avoid these, broad stroke labels that people want to put on someone who tries to do work in this area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I look at it in several facets. So I would say the first one is if you're looking at changing hearts and minds and significant shifts that have been ingrained in the status quo, you're going to get resistance. Period. It's to be expected. I always say that, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So there is comfort in the status quo. And I always bring it up, what do you need to do to maintain a status quo? Absolutely nothing. So there's going to be that resistance. My whole thing and my approach to your question, Adam, is more so around the first step is how do you discern, which I have mechanisms to do this, the good faith from the bad faith actors. There are lots and lots of folks that legitimately are resistant, but they're also resistant because they just don't understand. And my thing is, if you're willing to listen and we're willing to identify our greater purpose in doing this work together, which is to ensure the safety, health, and opportunity for the children in the district, then we have common ground to start from. Okay. And believe it or not, that I've literally worked with districts where their adults said they don't care about the kid at all. They will literally say, I don't care what the kids are learning. What I care about is what I think. Okay. And I'm like, okay, so you're basically making it about yourself, which is not what this is. And so then you have, and this goes back to something I had shared. So for the audience that before we started recording is the importance around media literacy, is the whole idea around recognizing that our stream of thought and our consciousness is generally can be shaped by the messaging we receive. And when you start to understand that there is a high volume of disinformation being pushed out, with the intent of getting you to have an emotional / visceral reaction only, that's where you get into those whole thing. I mean, you look at everything from all the folks that are against CRT. Well, first of all, I always ask, are we talking culturally responsive teaching, critical race theory, or the Chris Rufo theory? And then they look at me sideways and I'm like, yeah, Google the name Chris Rufo, and then you will see that that's the person who started this whole CRT narrative in the first place. I go, he has a theory. That is not what critical race theory is, and that certainly isn't what culturally responsive teaching is. Now, if you want to say that you distill it down to critical race theory is, which I've heard this is the same tired, played out talking point. Critical race theory, it teaches white kids hate themselves and feel bad about their race. I would say, okay, well, first of all, I don't know of a single educator that their goal is to make any kid feel bad about themselves. Okay. I go, keep in mind, if I were to stipulate to that, that means that I have a full knowledge and awareness of what critical race theory is, and I'm willing to apply it in a way that vilifies a child for who they are when they look in the mirror. And I go, that is not what it is. And I go, the whole idea around all of this is that it is forcing people to interrogate what they were taught, the environments that they operate within, and many of our social systems that exist right now. There are many things that critical race theory points to that I do think should be taught in schools around understanding, for example, why the data shows a disparity in access to officers' positions in many of our Fortune 500 companies. Why is there data that points to the disparity in housing affordability and housing accessibility? Why is there a disparity in the representations of our mass incarceration rates? Why is there a disparity in things like our representations in fill in the blank? Like you can't
that's just because people work harder. Ken, that's a simple answer. Some people just work harder than others, and they really love the American dream. I mean, duh.
Yeah, it's the myth of meritocracy. Look, the whole idea is hard work is subjective. And when I've engaged in dialogue with folks, I always say, look, you know what? If you came to visit me, I would drive about an hour northwest of where I live. And then I would say to you, how do you define working hard? Because I'll show you people that do backbreaking work 14 hours a day in the hot sun, picking strawberries, broccoli, spinach, lettuces, and all sorts of other things, so that when we go to the store, it only costs us a few dollars. So would you define that as hard work? Because if you believe in the meritocracy, then one would say that by them putting in that many hours and doing that work, at some point, they would essentially be able to purchase the land that they're working on. Right? So I don't diminish what hard work is. I always ask people to just keep in mind that it's subjective and it's only definable in context. But the whole idea around that is to recognize that there isn't a level playing field, that some of us do have more access to things than others. And that's a whole idea around privilege. And I always encourage folks in my workshops to recognize that privilege, if you look at privilege and then look at yourself and associate it with a negative, then you really need to ask yourself, why am I associating this with a negative? Because to me, the whole idea is when you start to recognize some of the privileges that you have, you actually can use those to advocate for those that don't have them. That's where we can identify the intersectionality point. And by the way, intersectionality is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's one of the legal scholars who developed the critical race theory framework. See,
just saying.
That's right there.
Just there we go. Where are you at?
It's the whole idea around that the human experience is very complex. You cannot and we should not allow people to oversimplify it and distill us into silos. That there are folks that work hard. There are lots of folks that work hard. There are some folks that I would argue don't work hard. The whole idea around, I remember I see the articles all the time, and I quite frankly think it's gaslighting, where they'll say, oh, this CEO has mastered the 4-hour workday. No, they haven't. They figured out a way to work for only 4 hours and offload the remaining 4 or more hours to somebody else. That's what's happened. Okay. If you go into, a restaurant, who's the hardest working folks in a restaurant?
You don't see them. They're usually behind the scenes. Yeah. And the servers.
Correct. I would argue that there are a lot of folks in the restaurant that are working hard. That's how the operation runs, between the servers, the bus personnel, the prep cooks, the sous chefs, the executive chef, the dishwasher. You see that? Look at all those different roles that are necessary for a restaurant to be operational. Yet, if you were to ask someone, who's the hardest working one? If you believe in hard work as a meritocracy, which means it is now a hierarchy, then you have to pick one of those individuals to say they're the ones that are working hard. And if they're the ones that are working hard, then by default, the other ones are not. That's why I reject that whole thing.
I just started thinking, like, you just made a complete parallel to what happens in schools, and the superintendent must be the hardest worker because he's figured it out, or she's figured it out, right? They can kind of do all this work for $350,000 while the teacher's making 50 here in Texas, at least.
So yeah, even that.
What I love about, well, here's what I love about Ken, and you guys, you can follow him on Twitter. He's at K_Shelton. Great follow. But also, I get the benefit of getting to interact with him on Facebook. So I'm not going to call out a lot of this stuff, but I just want to say there's one that got me the other day, and I love, because one thing I like about Ken is that he always shows me and gives me kind of an idea to think differently too. And I feel like I agree with you. We need to always be improving. So, and he doesn't know this, but I'm going to tell him this right now. One of the reasons why I wrote my latest book, Ready, Set, Fail, was because we had a conversation a couple, 3 years ago about why schools tend to push towards conformity and compliance and less toward like actual differentiation, diversity, different thinking. And so from that, I thought it's absolutely right. And ever since we had that conversation, I saw it everywhere I went. It's kind of opened my mind to some things. Well, another one recently for me is that I used to always say this comment: we get into teaching not for the income, but for the outcome. And when I saw it, I was like, oh no. And then I saw someone post it and Ken went at it. And I was like, oh God, this is good. But in a way, I'm like scared because like I've been saying this too. But then another way, I'm like, what have I been saying or what have I been missing wrong about it? So give me your thoughts on the not income, not outcome. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but just a quick little synopsis on that.
Yeah, the quick synopsis of that is that's gaslighting. I mean, pure and simple. And for the audience, I'm big on doing this. So to Adam's question, I think it's important. And by the way, this is the way I'm framing my book. I'm using terms, I'm defining the terms and then using them within context. So I'm using the term gaslighting. So I'll give the audience a very quick nexus. Gaslighting, the term stems from what was originally a play that was adapted into a film. And the whole idea, it was written in the UK. And the whole idea around gaslighting is that it's a husband who was engaging in extramarital activities, and he wanted to psychologically manipulate his wife. And so he would turn on the gas light outside the front door, and then she'd come in, and then he'd turn it off, and she'd say, hey, why is the gas light on? And he'd say, well, yes, it's not on. That's in your head. You're imagining things. Go look, it's not on. And then the other thing he would do is he would move stuff around in their home, and she'd say, wait a minute, I thought this was over there. No, you're imagining things. That's just your imagination. And so that's the whole idea around the term gaslighting. So the teachers don't do it for the income, they do it for the outcome, is gaslighting, because what it does, and this is where I really think for all of us that are speakers, and I'm not going to name names, but there are speakers that do this, and I vehemently reject and despise it, to be honest with you, is the whole idea around you don't do it for the income, you do it for the outcome. That is a way of making you feel less than if you're not doing more than. And the whole idea for me, which is a problem I see in education, is if you look at performing the essential functions of our job only is seen as not good enough. And this goes back to your income question before. If I do only what is in the contract, that's not enough for me to perform my job. And so what do they do? Well, you got to do extra. You got to bring work home. You got to do this. You got to do that. All these sorts of things. If the system is predicated on you doing more than what you are contracted to do, the system is flawed by design. And so that whole statement around you don't do it for the income, you do it for the outcome is a way of making you think to yourself, wow, I am doing it for the outcome, which means I need to do more and not worry about the income. Wrong. If it's essential, it's in the contract. If it needs more, then it needs to be in the contract, period. And so I reject that whole thing because that is one of the common threads I see that leads to teacher burnout is you're constantly giving up your evenings, giving up your weekend, giving up time that isn't part of your contracted hours in order to perform the essential functions of your job. And eventually it breaks. Eventually it does. And my whole thing is like, look, I brought it up with some superintendents that are good friends of mine where I was like, how might the school day look as far as effectiveness if teachers were afforded the opportunity to have 2 prep periods, you went to block scheduling, and then during that prep period, they use that time to provide feedback to students and design future lessons based upon the feedback they're providing to students. So what might that look like as far as the teacher acknowledgement and recognition that it's important in what they do, but also them being responsive to the needs of the kids? And I go, and you could do that within the boundaries of the guardrails of your current contract. But I don't like the whole thing of you got to do more, you got to go above and beyond. Why?
110%.
We start early doing that. Here's my theory too. We start early doing that with homework. Think about that. The whole concept of homework is you have to do more work at home to get better at what you're supposed to do during the day. And if you don't do this homework, you're not going to be as good as the next kid. So you're already starting early on having kids think, okay, after a quote unquote 8-hour day, you have to go home and do more of this stuff that you already did. So you're starting at 5 years old teaching them that concept. So it becomes ingrained in our brain that when I get a job, I'm supposed to take some work home with me and do it.
Dare I say, that's how you build in a mindset that accepts capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Oh,
Ooh. Hot take.
It does. It does. I here's my thing with that. You'll notice that and it's some of the teachings from Coach Wooden, from John Wooden, which you all can't see it, but I have his pyramid of success posted up on the wall of my home office. Busy does not equal productive, and productive does not and productivity doesn't equal accomplishment. Period. So just because you're doing more, remember here's one for you all, and we've been around long enough. Remember how rigor was associated with volume?
Yeah. Got to have more
we need
rigor.
More rigorous. So we're going to give them more hours of work. And to Adam's point, I do want this in the recording. To Adam's point, I used to do that. I remember I had one student, and this is why I always ask learners, when's the last time you learned something from the learners that you're responsible for? And if the answer isn't the last 24 hours, then you got to ask yourself, are you actually listening and are you being responsive? Just a question. I had a student that was very efficient at getting his work done in class. And class period was about 50 minutes, and he would just get his work done in about 30 to 35. I would look at it and I would say, perfect. You met all the proficiency measures for this project. You did great. Now I'm going to give you more work. And it took a little while. And then he was like, you know what, Mr. Shelton, I got to tell you, that's not cool that you keep giving me more work. And I'm like, why? We're in class. You got to be busy.
Got to be busy.
And he was like, yeah, but the thing is you're punishing me. I finished the work. It meets the proficiency standards that you set for the project. He's like, I want to be able to go use the camera. I want to go do something creative. And that was when I had an epiphany. I was like, holy cow, he's right. And I'm like, you know what? His name was Ralph. I go, you know what, Ralph? Here's one. How about this? And this is where I shifted to a much more cooperative learning environment. I said, I have a request. I want you to share with your classmates some of the strategies that you have developed to be more efficient with what you do. Because now I'm thinking, here's real world math. Now I'm thinking, if everybody in class develops efficiency strategies and protocols to accomplish the projects to meet all the proficiency standards, and they do it in 30 minutes, we now have gained another 20 minutes of class to do more creative activities. So you reward the efficiency. And that's why I always laugh when it's like, oh, it took them 4 hours to do it. Okay, well, what happens if it took me 1 hour to do it? Am I going to be punished for that? Or am I going to be appropriately acknowledged that I figured out a way to be more efficient at getting it done?
That's like me walking out at 3:45 when the teacher's there. Like, I'm here till 5:30 every night. How are you walking out at 3:45? It's like, because I got it done better. I mean,
got it done, right?
I mean, it doesn't. I can sit there and look busy, but
correct. And Carl, that goes back to the point. You don't do it for the income; you do it for the outcome. I work hard. I stay until 6 p.m. That's on you.
Yeah, yeah.
I ain't stay until 6. I have a personal life. I need self-care. Okay. And my thing with that is like, I remember having that argument with some of the teachers at my last school, and I was like, look, you know what? You don't need to argue with me. Just go ask the students that I had. Are their needs being met? Are they being seen and heard?
Yes. Check the box.
Am I being equitable and inclusive?
There you go.
See?
Well, before we get to our wrap-up question, Ken, I could talk to you. We could talk for probably 2 or 3 hours. I have to throw this in because I feel like what an opportunity we have here. Now, this season, we've been really I've been teasing Adam because I feel like he needs, like all teachers out there, we need some extra money. And so with Adam, I've decided to launch an OnlyFans account that is his Knuckles. So it's called Adam's Knuckles. There they are. And having a former actor on the podcast, I have to ask for advice. What advice would you give Adam and his Knuckles? Oh, we're going to have a show in the Knuckles. Those of you that are listening are missing out on this. You have to watch the video recording. So just real quick fun. What is some advice for Adam to make his Knuckles just really shine?
Yes.
Moisturize, hydrate. Moisturize, hydrate.
Moisturize, hydrate. Here he goes. And like on cue, he has what?
Actually, here's your cycle: moisturize, hydrate, exfoliate, moisturize, hydrate, moisturize, hydrate. There you go.
You gotta add that to the mix, Adam. We've forgotten as your manager, we're missing that part of it. I'm gonna make sure that's added to the mix.
And you know what else to add to that? I think what we should do, the three of us, the next time we're in the same conference or same space, let's go get manicures and pedicures.
Oh man, now you're making me nervous. It's not the manly part of it. I think I've talked about this. I have a fear of people touching my feet, but my dad loves it, and so when he's almost died twice now, the last couple of big surgeries he's had, I promised him, I was like, if you survive, and there's a chance you won't, I'll go get a pedicure with you. And every time he keeps surviving, unfortunately. I mean, fortunately.
Unfortunately, you don't do dad like that, man.
There's a 15% chance that he won't make it every time. And I'm like, oh, maybe this time. No. So we go and get our feet done, and we can get our nails, the nails painted on our toes. And those last a long time, let me tell you. I got a lot of looks at the pool.
Do you get your nails painted?
I did, yeah. And the last time it was right before summer, so of course every day at the pool, all the neighborhood kids, everyone's wanting to come check out my nails, and I'm just owning it. I'm like, yep, ain't nothing wrong. Ain't nothing wrong with this.
It's all good, self-care. Listen, I have friends that played in the NFL that would go get manicures and pedicures literally all the time, and they're like, you know what? I can take care of my muscles, I can take care of my body, but I'm gonna have somebody else do that for me. And I remember used to telling all the guys that were receivers, they would go. Remember, you're making money because of them hands. You better take care of them, and that's one of the ways they would go do it. So, and I would just laugh.
Wasn't a Philadelphia wide receiver that said, "I just like to thank my hands"?
Wasn't that Terrell Owens? I think.
Oh, I thought it was D-Jax, but yeah, maybe
one of those guys. I just want to thank my hands.
I could see the next live recording live from a manicure. The three of us live. We got to make this happen somehow.
Let's do it.
Or just do it. Just do it for fun.
PD, so that would be perfect.
Yes.
That would be perfect. We got to get a sponsor there if we can.
Yeah,
we could totally do this with a sponsor. Come on.
That was one of those kind of undisrupted questions, but so I'm gonna flip it a little bit. We normally ask people how do they stay undisrupted, but we can go with the mani pedi on the undisrupted piece. But I want to ask you this because you kind of seem like a disruptor to me. So in education, what would be one thing that you would want educators to try to disrupt moving forward?
I'm glad you asked that. Y'all gonna have to have me back. I actually don't believe in disruption. I believe in dismantling because there's a difference. Boom. Yeah. In fact, I juxtapose the difference between the two in a newer keynote that I do. Disruption is temporary. Think about when you're in a classroom, you have a disruptive student. What do? They change what is normalized protocols or behaviors. You go through whatever's necessary to stop that disruption, and you return back to what preceded the disruption. I'm for dismantling. So even like you just mentioned, the homework thing, homework needs to be completely dismantled. There's no disruption. I don't want it temporary. I want it gone. And when you think in terms of, in fact, I share the steps in that keynote is you have to dismantle, then reimagine, then redesign. You cannot redesign something that still exists as it previously was. That's just a remix. So for me, to answer your question based on the way you posed it, to me, disruption. So what do we temporarily do? We need to temporarily trouble the narrative and get people to think outside what is normalized for them. And then that ideally will serve as a catalyst for the dismantling. Carl brought up the whole thing around compensation. The system is busted. There's no disrupting that. That has to be dismantled, reimagined, and redesigned. Period. That's the only way you're going to see sustainable change in anything that is of any meaningful value.
This is why I think we missed I don't know if we missed it completely, but I feel like there's an opportunity in the last couple of years, and I hate to make an opportunity out of a pandemic, but I was like, come on, now's the chance. All this dismantling, the rebuilding, let's start it all over from scratch and figure out how do we rebuild it. And now we're back to where there's some charters figuring out some things for those that are allowed to get into charters. But again, public education left on the doormat.
That's the bad C word. You can't say that.
Well, I mean, look, maybe for another conversation. Here's the thing. Aside from my legitimate criticisms of charter schools, Carl just touched on a major point, is the fact that they are able to adapt to the needs of the student population, in many cases, the communities that they serve, rather than cookie cutter, one size fits all. What might that look like in our public school systems to decrease the need for charters in the first place? This is why I as much as I'm critical of things like charter schools, Teach for America, all of that stuff. I'm like, those programs or those things wouldn't exist if they didn't fill some sort of a need or a desire. Now, if public schools are in a position to be responsive to what those needs are and acknowledge and prioritize where the desires are, then you wouldn't need those things in the first place.
He is Ken Shelton, everybody. You can follow him on Twitter at K_Shelton. Follow his work also at KennethShelton.net. You can check him out. Great speaker. I have seen him speak several times. You guys got to bring this guy in. Yes, the GOAT. He's the GOAT. Thank you for joining us. And also for the listeners out there, be sure to subscribe and give us a review. We'd appreciate it. We might even give you a shout out at a future show. This has been the UnDisrupted podcast brought to you by Future Ready Schools. He's Adam, and you can follow him at AskAdam3.
And he's Carl, and you can follow him at Mr. Hooker. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are better together.
And we are better undisrupted.